Welcome to this edition's Nobel Dialogue, an interview series with Nobel laureates about their research, their life, as well as the behind-the-scenes stories. My today's guest is Professor Randy Schekman from University of California, UC Berkeley, who was awarded the 2013 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for the discovery of vesicle trafficking, a trafficking mechanism for various biological molecules in the cell and across the cell membrane. Today, we will be talking about his childhood, his achievements as an editor of reputable journals such as the PNAS and eLife, his advocacy for open access science, as well as how the Nobel Prize changed his life. Professor Schekman, thank you very much for joining us in this Nobel Dialogue.
Happy to be here.
First of all, I would like to start off with a question regarding the COVID-19 pandemic, since research has been a bit toned down during the pandemic. So I would just like to ask you, how has your research been going on and other activities during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, my lab was shut down for a few months, but the campus partially opened up, and now for maybe the last 6 weeks or so, the students and postdocs have been able to work in shifts to a maximum of 25% of capacity for the building. So that really has slowed things down, but they're back to their projects. We had a very good interlude before work began, where we talked a lot during Zoom calls about ideas, and we continued with our journal club, and the journal club presentations were more thorough than usual because we really dug deeply into papers, and so we came up with some ideas, and wasn't a total loss. I stayed home with my partner for a few months, but then I had to come into the lab, and I'm still coming in every day now to work on a course that I'm teaching. I'm teaching introductory biology now, and of course it's all done by remote learning. I'm recording my lectures and then doing synchronous sessions by Zoom webinar, and that's been fine, but it takes time. Other campuses have gone to 50%, and I've been pushing my institution to do likewise. They would be willing to, but the local city government controls the decision about how much we can restore normal operations. The infection rate on campus has remained very low, and I believe among people who are actually working on campus, it may be even lower. So people are very cautious, and they maintain social distancing, and everyone wears a mask. And I'm not wearing a mask because I'm in my own office and it's closed. Yeah. But when I go out to my office through the rest of the building, or when I go outside, I wear a mask.
Yeah. That's basically the same here at Harvard. We're mostly working in shifts, but I hope research is going to ramp up. Regarding your professional career, I would like to start from the very, very beginning, when you were a young boy and you got started. You basically started getting interested in microbes. Can you maybe tell us more a bit about why you started getting interested in microbes, and why did you choose that field for your future research?
I can't say exactly why this happened, but I had a kind of an interest in some aspects of science when I was very young, astronomy, but nothing really serious. And then when I was about 12 years old, I got a present, probably for a birthday, I don't remember, but it was a toy microscope. And I remember taking to it very seriously, and one day I went to a local riverbed. I grew up at this time of my life in Orange County, California, which now very heavily populated and subdivided. But back then it was still largely agricultural. And there was a river nearby and some farm fields. And I collected a jar of pond scum, dirty water from the creek. I guess I somehow knew that there'd be something interesting to look at. So I examined this, a drop of it on a glass slide, and I was just blown away by the teeming life at this microscopic level. It was, for some reason, captivating. And so I spent many hours in my room just studying these things, and I found a way to project the image onto a centered glass screen. And I did a science fair project, I think it was in 8th grade, about just observing these microorganisms. And I became aware when I was in 7th grade of the annual school science fair. This was in what is now called middle school. It used to be called junior high school. And I that was before I had done anything. And I went to the science fair, and I was just really taken with all these little individual projects that each student had cooked up, him or herself. And that appealed to me for some reason. And I did one the next year. And then I realized the limitations of this toy. So I was at a dinner table. I seem to recall that I was talking about this to my parents, and I think somehow my father was skeptical that I could see this toy. And so I remember being slightly put off by his attitude. So I decided then and there to save money. I used to babysit and mow lawns and deliver newspapers. So I would a few bucks here and there. And I remember saving, my goal was to save $100, and I kept it in an envelope in the closet of my bedroom. But I couldn't quite get to the $100 that I needed because my mother kept borrowing the money for family things. And so one Saturday morning, I was mowing a neighbor's lawn, and I somehow got it in my head that I was never going to get to the money unless I did something drastic. So after I finished, I rode my bicycle to a local police station, and I told the duty officer that I was running away from home because my mother was stealing my money and I couldn't get my microscope. So they called the father in, and he talked to the captain, and he came out, and I don't think he wasn't terribly happy about this, but we did drive to a pawn shop in Long Beach nearby that day, and I bought this Bausch & Lomb student professional microscope, and that was my pride and joy throughout high school. Every year I would mount a science fair project, and 3 times in successive years I went to the California State Science Fair, and last year I won fifth place in high school.
Wow.
And then of course the microscope got put away when I went away to college, and kind of forgot about it. But then when I moved to Northern California to take my position at Berkeley, and I bought a home for my family, my parents had saved that microscope. They threw everything else up, but they saved that. They set it up, and I kept it in a closet. And my children, neither of them were interested in science, so it never got used for anything. And fortunately, when the Nobel came knocking, after a few days, they asked all the laureates to identify some memento of their scientific work. And most people pick something from their professional life. But I remember that old microscope, and it was still there in a closet. So I dusted it off and sent it to them, and they were quite happy with it. It's still, years later, on display in the Nobel Museum.
Yeah.
So
that's a great story.
I can't imagine, when I was 13 years old and had this microscope, thinking 50 years forward to where it would end up. It just blows my mind to still think about it.
Moving on a bit from your childhood, I want to get to year 1991 when you became the Howard Huges Medical Institute investigator. So Howard Huges Medical Institute investigator program basically supports scientists which made important discoveries and innovators. So I would like to ask how the HHMI program, investigator program, helped you in your career, and what was the most obvious thing that it helped you in your research?
Well, by the time I became a Hughes investigator, which was January 1991, the work that we'd done here at Berkeley had advanced, quite reasonably. I had been a faculty member for 15 years at that point. Many Hughes investigators are selected earlier in their career. At that time, they weren't really doing it the same way. And so I had already established a reputation, and the work had its own momentum at that point. It was going very well. So it was, of course, wonderful to be a Hughes investigator because I didn't have to worry so much about money for the research. And what it really allowed me in subsequent years was to do other things of a scientific nature in addition to the work in my lab. So by 1991, I had become an editor for the annual review of Cell and Developmental Biology, and I was an associate editor of the Journal of Cell Biology. So I became head of the division of biochemistry here in my department, and then later on I became the co-chair of the department. So all these other things would have been much more difficult if I had been constantly having to write NIH grants.
Yeah, yeah, it kind of liberated you
It
in some
liberated
way.
me. That's probably not what Huges has in mind when they give people investigators. They probably want them to focus even more on their own research. But I felt probably because of the role models that I had here at Berkeley of more senior faculty who were really citizens of science, and particularly Daniel Koshland, who was the chair of the biochemistry department when I was hired. He was a really wonderful man and very giving of his time to his science as well as to the world of science. And so that was a kind of a role model, and that was just sort of the ethic around here, that people pitched in and they didn't just keep everything for themselves. So that then changed the way I looked at things, and later on I became the editor-in-chief of the PNAS, and then later still I became the founding editor of eLife. And now I stepped down from that a couple of years ago, and I'm on to a brand new thing having to do with Parkinson's disease that we can talk about.
Okay. Oh yeah, we can for sure talk. But just since you mentioned PNAS, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, the journal, in 2006, if I remember correctly, you became the editor-in-chief. So what would you say was your primary goal as the editor-in-chief for PNAS to achieve?
I felt that the journal had not kept up its impact, at least in the life sciences, and it was largely a life science journal, still is, as a result of competition from these sort of more so-called high-profile journals, actually commercial journals. And I really resented the influence of false measurements like journal impact factor. And I thought that, with the PNAS, the decisions are made by active scholars, not by professional managers. And yet, when I was a graduate student, the PNAS was the journal that I wanted to publish in. All my best stuff, I wanted to be in the PNAS, but that was no longer the case. Many members of the National Academy would try to get their work published in one of these high-profile journals, and then when they failed, they would just turn around and contribute their own work to the PNAS with little supervision. So when I took on the job, I decided I wanted to improve the standards by really forcing the Academy members to try to really publish their better work, if not their best work. They weren't using it to publish their best work. They were using it just as an easy way to get stuff published. And so I increased the pressure on them by empowering the editorial board to reject member-contributed papers if they didn't think they had done a proper job in addressing comments of the reviewers. And that, of course, caused a lot of grief for me because the members didn't like their privileges being abridged. So that became a major chore that I had dealing with membership entitlement. So one of the things I did that I'm happy with at the PNAS was there used to be a path to publication where a scientist who was not a member could ask a member of the Academy to communicate a paper on their behalf. And this was often done as a favor to a friend by a member of the Academy who was not in the same field, and may have been somebody who was very senior and not really active in science at all. And that path was widely abused as far as I was concerned. And so, when you're changing a journal that's been around for 100 years, it takes a lot of effort. You can't just do it unilaterally. So I got the members to agree that to do away with that privilege. Actually, many of them were happy to give it up because they didn't like to be pestered by people to communicate papers on their behalf. But then the remaining privilege that they'll never get rid of is when a member contributes his or her own work. And there I also saw a lot, and continue to see a lot of abuse. A member will simply get some of his friends to serve as reviewers, and so So the journal, I mean, I still like the journal, and I publish in the journal occasionally. I think it continues to be respected. But the problem is that the commercial journals have branded themselves so effectively that young scholars feel that if they don't publish a paper in Cell, Nature, or Science, they're not going to have a career. And I resent that. I reject the influence of these journals. And you may know, on the day that I received the Nobel Prize, on the ceremony day, I issued a scathing report in the newspaper, The Guardian, saying that I personally was going to boycott these journals, and
I know that, yeah.
just likewise. And on that very day, which was the busiest day of my life, in the early morning, I conducted a live BBC broadcast interview where I debated an editor of Science about the comments that I'd made in this editorial, and I was very happy with the outcome of that debate.
Yeah, great. And because of your advocacy for open science, you founded the journal eLife. Can you maybe tell us more? What was the primary motivation for founding eLife, and what would you say is like the difference between eLife and other journals apart from open science, maybe? Mm-hmm.
Well, I had come to the end of my first 5-year term as the editor of the PNAS, and I had been reviewed and offered another 5-year term, which I initially accepted. But then I was asked to consider this new journal that was being started by the Wellcome Trust, the Max Planck Society, and Howard Hughes. And I saw those three as very strong organizations. They were providing substantial financial resources to start the journal, and they wanted an impact, and they wanted to diminish the influence of the professional managers who hold hegemony in the decisions on whether something gets reviewed and published. And their feeling, as mine was, that to return science to the people who do the science. We're perfectly capable of running our own journals. We don't need professional editors making decisions for us. We need staff to help, but we should be in the position of authority in making decisions, not someone who's frankly being paid to sell magazines. So I felt that with this new journal, I had an opportunity for a clean slate in a way that I would never have had at the PNAS. And it was an easy decision to jump ship and take on this new task. And within 2 years, I had the Nobel Prize, and that certainly helped for publicity. So,
I can imagine, yeah.
So anyway, it was a very good experience, and I picked some terrific colleagues to help me as senior editors, and I had a wonderful staff. And the core leadership got together and plotted strategy about having a new kind of format for review, which I think was the most important thing we did. I decided that the members of the board should also serve as reviewers and not merely pawn it off on one of their postdocs or some colleague. And then I suggested that we have the reviewers, other academics, render their opinions independently, but then confer with one another before a decision is posted on the page of the manuscript. So what happens is that everyone does their own review. It's posted online at the link to the journal article, but the author has not seen the decision yet. And then there's a period of a day or more where the reviewers confer with one another about the relative merits of the work and differing opinions about their reviews. And the editor who has supervised the discussion is then asked to write a summary letter with the key points that the author needs to address if the paper seems worthy of final publication. So that goes without the raw critiques. That decision letter goes to the author, and then the author is asked to respond. And if they can, then it goes back to the board member. And since that person was supervising the review, he or she should be in a position to make a unilateral decision. So that's how it works. It cuts the length of time, and it empowers the reviewers. The reviewers have equal authority to the board member. It's not some employee of the journal making the decision. And so most of our authors are very happy with the review process. And the submissions to the journal have been very high and continuing to grow even after I stepped down, whereas many other journals have seen declines in their submission. eLife has grown. Of course, we also took a very firm position in opposition to using impact factor as a measure of anything. Indeed, the people who peddle this number, the firm that peddles the number, you're expected to apply to have a number computed on your behalf, and we of course never applied. And they decided that they were just going to compute the number for us anyway. And we wrote to them and told them we weren't interested in their number, and they said it's public information, we'll do what we want. And so they have imposed a number on us, and I don't care what it is. It's a meaningless number. And people keep reminding me about the number, but I don't care. It's a phony number, and I just doesn't concern me in the least.
For you, what would be the most important parameter of a journal? Like, if you were to pick a single parameter, is there maybe a single parameter that's like most important for a journal?
I think the judgment of one's peers is the thing that concerns me most. And so open access, of course, I think open access is terribly important. There, every reason to see how valuable it's been in this pandemic period to have open access. But to me, it was to make the decisions and the influence of the journal based on the judgment of one's peers, and not some managers who are, I think, financially compromised in making decisions.
Yeah, that's a great comment. And you said, yeah,
editor for eLife is making money off of the decisions that they render.
Okay, yeah, that's great. That's great. And you said you stepped down from eLife and started something new regarding Parkinson's. Maybe can you maybe tell us more about that? Yeah.
So my wife suffered from Parkinson's disease for 20 years and was progressively debilitated physically, and then cognitively. She suffered from dementia for some years. And while she was in decline, I was approached by the chief financial officer of a very major philanthropy to ask whether I'd be interested in working in some way on Parkinson's. And they were throwing around for some new idea about how to deploy a large sum of money to do something in science on Parkinson's. And so at the time, I thought, well, it's not my fair area of research. Obviously, I'm interested, concerned, but I don't know what I could do. And then my wife died. She died 3 years ago, suddenly. And I was approached again by this gentleman who asking if I would serve to chair a committee that he had already established of neuroscientists who were meeting at the annual meeting of the Society for Neuroscience to try to determine which elements of basic science of Parkinson's could benefit from a substantial infusion of funds. So I went to this meeting, and I knew some of the people. I didn't know many of them, but I could see that this was a kind of a setup to have me take it over. So within a few months, I became the chief scientific officer of an effort called Aligning Science Across Parkinson's, ASAP. And at that point, I realized this was going to be a big effort, and I had done what I wanted to do at eLife. So I stepped down after, I think, about 8 years. I stepped down and took up this new role. And we have been busy for 2 years, and just a few weeks ago announced our first awards to 21 teams of investigators in 60 different institutions, 96 PIs in 11 different countries. And through a series of meetings that I held with Parkinson's experts, I decided what I wanted to do, a little bit like the ethic that we had at eLife, was to make it more of a collaborative effort. And so, academic science, as you and I have practiced, is largely an individual initiative. People are rewarded for individual efforts. Whereas in the real world, for example, in the pharmaceutical industry and in biotech, it's all about the team. And the goal is more important than any individual. Whereas in academic science, it's the reward structure, published in high-profile journals, et cetera, that favors the individual. And I can't complain about it. I've benefited from that system. On the other hand, my sense is that for really tough problems, like Parkinson's, which has been around for 200 years, for which very little substantial progress has been made, that, bringing together people who really work effectively as teams, separate PIs who've been. So what we did is we put out a call about a year ago for teams of 3 to 5 PIs and their groups. And we asked not that they just come together with a proposal, but at the core, the team must consist of people who have already been actively collaborating with each other. Parkinson's are on some other thing. And the reason for that was they will have been able to demonstrate their ability to work effectively in a collaborative mode. I had one such relationship for 15 years with a electron microscopist in Geneva, and we spoke every day. We never wrote a grant together, but we published lots of papers together. And we didn't care whose name went where on the list of authors because we had a common goal. Very different approaches, but a common goal. And my sense is that there are people like that out there who enjoy and benefit from it. Whereas, of course, there are many grants that call for people to collaborate, but they're usually shotgun weddings, where people, you dangle money in front of people and they'll find, long lost friends or collaborators, but they're not terribly enduring or meaningful, in my experience. But so with this core here of the teams that we've selected, most of them, all of them to some extent, but most of them have had one or two members of their team with whom they've published before and collaborated and have ongoing work. And so we picked those teams, and we've awarded $161 million for 3 years. And we just put out another call for other aspects of Parkinson's. It's all basic science. We're not funding clinical work. We're not funding drug discovery. It's all basic science because we're committed to the principle that for this disease, there's no understanding at a fundamental level what goes wrong. There are lots of clues because there are a bunch of genes, mutant alleles of which are in families with the disease. But it's like a big puzzle with the pieces don't necessarily fit together very well. So this is what we're up against, and I'm very excited by this. And it's in a way to honor my wife, and that's what I'm going to do for the time that I have remaining.
Yeah, it's a great cause, and I really wish you all the best with Parkinson's and research. I really think we need more understanding for sure in that field. Great. And just prior to the last block of a few questions, I would just like to ask, you won the Nobel Prize in 2013. So can you maybe just briefly tell us how did from that day on, how did your life change?
Well, it changed in good ways and in a slightly uncomfortable way. I mean, the uncomfortable aspect of it is people treat you differently. It really is unlike anything else that I've experienced in that respect.
A way.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've won other awards. I won the Lasker Prize, which is a big deal. But, you win the Lasker Prize, and that feels good for a while, and then you go back to normal life. But when you win the Nobel, you're treated differently by people from that moment on, and it takes some getting used to. I try to be the same person that I always was, but I think that's not really possible. So anyway, so I've gotten used to that. But it does open doors. That's the good thing. It really opens doors. It was certainly for the journal, it was a big deal because we use that publicity for the journal. That was great. And I've used the opportunity to broadcast my views about the importance of public higher education. I've been a creature of the University of California much of my life, and I feel very strongly about the role of public institutions. And there's a good, productive, constructive, give and take little fight between the private institutions like Harvard and Stanford, and I'm on the side of the public institutions because I went to UCLA. That was, my parents couldn't afford anything other than that, and it was great. It was, in spite of it, it was gave me the opportunities that I sought and the training that I needed. And I feel strongly that I want to be there for other kids who have that experience. And it's, there's the students who come here are, the economic profile of the students that come here is very different than at the undergraduate level. The students who go to Harvard, a completely different kind of person. The Harvard students are bright and brilliant, and that's great, but they come very often from a sense of privilege and entitlement. And you just don't see that here. You just don't see it. You see lots of strivers, overachievers. I feel that's what I was, and that's the kind of person I want to be responsible for.
I think it's amazing that you're trying to help people, like public education, and just, I think that's amazing. I think we can really all benefit from that. That's great. Do you maybe have a favorite hobby that you really enjoy doing?
Well, I love classical music. My children both got that interest from me. My son is a classical musician in orchestra.
Oh.
My daughter sings semi-professionally classical music. So I love the opera, and I love symphonies. I love chamber music.
If you didn't choose the science pathway, what would you be in life? Like, what job would you be doing?
Well,
Music?
I probably would have ended up as a physician.
Okay.
It's hard to imagine how my life would have been different. When I started college, my intention was to go to medical school. I was a pre-med student to begin with, because growing up, I had no role models when I was growing up. My father was an engineer. My mother was a homemaker. There were no academics or physicians in my family. But my interest in biology, it seemed to, reasonable to consider a career as a physician. But in my first year at UCLA, I was introduced just in my freshman year working in a research laboratory, and my first encounter with a faculty member was, you don't know much about this field, so why don't you read this book? It was Watson's first edition of the molecular biology and reading that book really, confirmed in my mind that what I really wanted was to be a scientist and not a physician. In fact, I would have been a terrible doctor.
Great. And my two final questions, they are kind of related, but the first one is, what was the best advice you've been given in your career?
I don't think it was someone sat me down and said, this is what you should do. But what I learned at Stanford in the biochemistry department from many of the faculty members there, it was a small department, very focused on DNA metabolism. What I learned from them, and certainly from Kornberg, was the importance of focus, of picking a problem, thinking clearly about what you want to do, where you want to take it, and then just sticking to it, and not deviating from that. I mean, try different approaches if it proves difficult, but don't deviate, and don't be deflected by all the, crazy ideas that a creative person has. And that may have been my own natural inclination. I can't say, but that certainly was what I learned in the Stanford biochemistry department. And that I'm certain really is part of why I was able to do what I did.
What's the most important trait you're looking for in a PhD student or postdoc? And I'm just going to add there, what advice do you have for PhD students and postdocs who are just starting their career?
Yeah. Well, a spark of enthusiasm, a high energy level, and an instinct to creativity. I had some amazing people in my lab, and I think if I wouldn't have changed anything. Berkeley was such a great place to have attracted these people. But the most accomplished people in my lab have had a knack for knowing what to do next, and then just sticking to it and making it work. Whereas the students who have to come to you and can't figure out where to take the problem, and you have to, I'm perfectly capable of advising them what to do next. But the ones who succeed are the ones who know instinctively what they should do next. And I've had several like that who've gone on to be very productive. I've had 6 former students and postdocs now members of the National Academy. I've had 2 who've won the Breakthrough Prize for my lab. So no, I've been very, very fortunate.
Yeah, and you know, maybe in the future some of your past postdocs or PhD students may win the Nobel Prize. You never know.
I'm quite certain.
Professor Schekman, thank you very much for joining me from UC Berkeley in this Nobel Dialogue. I wish you all the best in your future research and the Parkinson research as well. And I hope we meet one day, maybe Harvard, maybe UC Berkeley, somewhere.
Yes, good luck to you, and
Thanks.
my greetings to the people who listen to this.